I never figured flipping through dusty manuscripts under flickering fluorescent lights could send shivers down anyone's spine. But here, me, your garden variety archive assistant, getting goosebumps at the university's central library. On my first day, they handed me this little crumpled sheet with 6 rules scrawled across it. Archive do's and don'ts. Keith, the balding and perpetually sleepy-looking manager, handed it over with a chuckle that seemingly bounced off the towering metal shelves and returned to him, popping a few more wrinkles around his eyes. His disposition screamed, entirely too relaxed for his own good. The first rule read simply, always leave by 6 p.m. Not a tough mandate, considering my day's supposed to end then anyway. But Keith's emphasis on the word always sent a tiny thrill of curiosity up my spine. He caught my raised eyebrow. "Trust me, it's better for everyone," he said, with a shrug that settled like an ambiguous cloud over our heads. My workstation was a small, slightly wobbly desk plunked at the end of a narrow aisle lined with gray boxes and old leather-bound volumes that exuded an odor of mold and forgotten words. It wasn't the dust that bothered me. It was that smell, like cold, stale air trapped inside a jar, never meant to be opened. The second rule was more oddball than the first. Never answer the phone if it rings past 5:55 p.m. I glanced at the bulky, black rotary phone squatting menacingly on my desk, as if it might demand answers I didn't have. Begrudgingly, I started sifting through a box marked miscellaneous. It's always miscellaneous here. Inside, nestled between a 1973 student newspaper and some dry academic papers on neurology, was a stack of letters bound by a faded red ribbon. That's when the lights flickered. Not the dramatic flicker of a dark, stormy night, but like someone was playfully teasing the switch, on, pause, off. It lasted just long enough for me to freeze, peering over my shoulder to the empty, dimly lit corridor behind me. The quiet was another thing. Libraries are supposed to be quiet, sure. But this quiet was heavy, thick like fog that you could feel in your lungs. It was during that suspended silence that I realized I could hear breathing. It was too irregular, too close to just be echoes of my own. I turned quickly, the letters forgotten, but saw only the endless rows of shelves standing watch like silent sentinels. I tucked the anomaly in my mind, labeling it under hyped-up nerves, and resumed my work. I kept humming under my breath some vague song from a commercial to fill the eerie stillness. Rule 3 slapped me back to the papers. Do not open any boxes labeled private correspondence under any circumstances. Someone's idea of archive humor, preceded by don't use the last stall of the restroom. It kind of unnerved me when painted alongside the granular atmosphere of the place. The tiny, weird occurrences began stacking up. Papers seemed to rustle when I wasn't looking. The slight gagging sweetness of decaying flowers drifted in and out like a wayward spirit. And the archives, with its infinite dust and shadow, began to feel less like a place of learning and more of forgetting, like it was meant to be forgotten. I was sorting through another box when the phone rang. The caller ID blinked ominously with unknown, and the clock behind it pointed at 5:56 p.m. Heart hammering against my ribs, I recalled Keith's sagging smile and the warning. Temptation prickled my skin, but I respected the foreboding enough to ignore the call. The ringing seemed to grow louder, more urgent, before it abruptly stopped. I lingered at the desk, thinking about how much noise a single silent phone could make in a space governed by quiet. That's when I noticed something in the stack of papers I had set aside. The ribbon had been neatly retied, but not by me. Not by anyone I saw. Shuffling through the papers, my fingers stumbled upon a small, hidden envelope at the bottom, unmarked and decidedly yellow with age. I opened it, against all my better judgment of boxes and privacy, and froze. Inside was a snapshot, just a blurred image of what looked like the archive room. But unmistakably, undeniably, there was a figure standing by my desk, just a smudge of darkness, looking back toward the camera with an intensity that felt almost palpable. My own desk, my chair. The overhead lights chose that exact moment to flicker again, this time plunging me momentarily into darkness. When the light sputtered back to a weak luminescence, I squinted down at the photo once more. The figure, previously a mere blur, seemed as though it had moved a fraction closer. The figure, previously a mere blur, seemed as though it had moved a fraction closer. Its shape, a little clearer now, struck cold fear through my veins. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, tossing dead leaves against the windows like soft, sporadic taps from unseen hands. I could hear my heart pounding in the eerie silence that followed each gust. I should move, put some space between me and whatever it was that lingered in the dim light of the hallway. But my legs refused, bound by a terror that made my insides churn. Just a shadow, I attempted to convince myself, my voice a fragile thread in the thick, stagnant air. It's only a trick of the light. Slowly, painfully slow, I edged backward toward the living room, my eyes locked on the figure. With every tentative step I took, a part of me screamed to turn away, to not provoke whatever was watching me. But not seeing it seemed an even worse kind of danger. The floorboard under my foot creaked loudly, breaking the hypnotic silence. As if nudged by the sound, the figure moved, or did it merely seem to pulse with a life of its own? My back hit the wall, a small shock that I felt ripple up my spine. Trapped. The fear was tangible, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. With nowhere to go, my eyes darted around for something, anything that might offer protection. They landed on the fireplace poker by the hearth. Clumsy fingers grasped it, the cold metal a small reassurance against the suffocating dread. I faced the hall again, poker raised slightly, an absurd shield against the form that kept edging closer. "Who are you?" My voice was a choked whisper, barely audible. My question hung unanswered in the charged air, just the wind's mournful cry and the erratic beating of my heart. Then a voice, so soft and fluid it seemed a continuation of the wind's whisper. "You know who I am." It was melodic and terrifying, a sound felt more than heard. I didn't recognize the voice, yet a memory tugged at my consciousness, a memory I couldn't quite grasp but filled me with an overwhelming sadness. I shook my head, a futile attempt to dislodge the burgeoning horror. "Stay back," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. The figure hesitated, or so it seemed. In the low light, its edge blurred then sharpened, as if it was adjusting itself to my sight. To my utter disorientation and mounting terror, it morphed subtly, a shoulder here, a contour there, until it almost resembled a person I knew. Or once knew. No, the realization tumbled from my lips before I could stop it. This was wrong, all wrong. "Do you remember?" The voice came again, this time a little stronger, coaxing. A chill ran through me, an icy cascade that prickled my skin with dread. I struggled to focus, to keep my thoughts aligned with the rational world. "No, this isn't real," I muttered, clinging to the fraying edges of my skepticism. My gaze slipped over the figure, and in a fleeting, torturous clarity I saw it, the resemblance to my brother, long deceased, his features twisting in the dark. The room spun around me. I was a child again, hearing the news of his tragic accident, feeling the denial that clawed at my young mind. How could he be here? "Don't be afraid," the figure said, moving closer now, the darkness around it seeming to stretch and bend with its movement. "I've missed you." I staggered, the poker clanging to the floor, forgotten. Tears blurred my vision. This was a nightmare, it had to be. Yet the grief, raw and fierce, felt brutally, painfully real. The figure stood now, where light met shadow, a spectral boundary that both beckoned and repelled. "He's gone," I whispered to myself, tears streaking down my face. "You're not him." The figure, my brother, or a cruel mimicry of him, paused, an expression of sorrow, or perhaps pity flicking across those too familiar features. Then, with heartbreaking tenderness, it reached out a hand, my brother's hand, the one I had held so many times. "I am here." Sobbing, torn between longing and terror, I found myself reaching out too, compelled by a love and loss so profound it swallowed my fear. Our fingers were inches apart when the clock in the hall struck midnight, its chime a harsh reminder of reality. The figure wavered like a candle flame in the wind, and then it vanished. I was alone in the living room again, the echo of the chiming clock loud in my ears, the poker lying innocently on the floor where I dropped it. Shaking, I wrapped my arms around myself, the air still cold with the remnants of contact never made and a grief renewed. The silence that settled was vast and empty, a stark contrast to the intensity of the moment before. What had just happened? Had the veil between past and present been momentarily lifted, or was my mind playing tricks, fueled by unresolved grief? Dread pooled in my stomach as I considered another encounter, another chime, another midnight. The waiting itself now another form of haunting. As each minute passed, the clock's ticks seemed to slow, synchronizing with the heavy palpitations of my heart. A cruel rhythm set just for me, in the confines of this dimly lit living room where the shadows clung too tightly to the corners, as if they, too, feared what was to come at midnight. I tried to convince myself that it was all a product of my frayed nerves, a mental phantasm born of sleeplessness, and that all too human fear of the unknown. The chime was just a chime, the kind one grows accustomed to in any old house with its creaks and sighs. But the memories of the previous nights didn't agree with my feeble attempts at rationalization. The silhouette at the window, barely perceptible yet unmistakably there, watching, waiting. Was it real? It had to be. The cold draft that followed, chilling my spine as if the night itself had whispered secrets in a language too ancient for me to understand, felt too real. I glanced at the grandfather clock across the room. 11:46 p.m. Less than 15 minutes until the next potential rendezvous with whatever waited in the darkness outside, or perhaps inside the house. I paced, each step a dull thud against the old wooden floors, which moaned softly under my weight as if in pain. Why did I return here, to this house that even as a child seemed more a guardian of shadows than a home? Nostalgia is a strange lurer of souls, pulling us back to places we know we should have forgotten. Back to faces in the window and whispers in the walls. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and I jumped, heart slamming against ribs as if trying to escape. "It's just wind," I scolded myself, watching as the curtains fluttered like ghostly hands reaching into the room. Gathering my courage, I walked over and peered outside. Nothing but the gnarled branches of the old oak tree swaying in the wind. And yet, somewhere in the dark lay eyes that watched. 11:53 p.m. I should check the locks. A routine check, a mundane action that shouldn't reek of desperation yet somehow did. I moved from window to door, securing each lock with a shaky hand. My own reflection in the glass stared back at me, eyes wide, brow furrowed. A stranger caught in a storm of fear, barely recognizable. 11:58 p.m. The house became still as if it too held its breath in anticipation. I returned to the living room, settling into the couch, eyes locked on the grandfather clock. The air hung heavy around me, thick with impending dread. Chime. I counted each one, heart sinking further with the melody that once sounded like home. 1, 2, 3, until the 12th chime echoed, a final note that sang like an elegy. Silence. I waited, my breath shallow, gazing fixedly at the window where the curtain still whispered secrets. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking underfoot, shattered the stillness. I started, turning toward the source. Nothing, just the old house settling, or so I told myself. Then, unmistakably, the sound of glass tapping, gentle yet persistent, like fingernails seeking entry. It was coming from the window looking out into the backyard. Every nerve in my body screamed to neither look nor acknowledge it, yet some primal, masochistic urge propelled me forward. As I approached, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. I reached the window, hand trembling as it pulled the curtain aside. My eyes met those of a pale-faced child, pressed so closely against the glass that condensation framed her features like a watery shroud. Her eyes were wide, imploring. I stumbled back, gasping. There was no child in this neighborhood, none that roamed at midnight. And yet here she was, or appeared to be, separated from me by nothing more than thin, fragile glass. The floorboards creaked behind me, and a cold dread washed over me. My head turned slowly towards the new dread, every instinct clamoring that I was no longer alone. The room behind seemed darker, deeper somehow, as if the shadows had grown denser, hungrier. Panic set in, a visceral, choking terror. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught between the child at the window and the deeper darkness behind me. My breath was a ragged thing, and my mind raced, all the old fears, the stories told in hushed tones about this house. They flooded back. It was then, in that frozen tableau of fear, that the child spoke, her voice a melody of sorrow and warning entwined. Don't look back. Despite the child's solemn warning, a primal urge twisted inside me, an irrepressible, morbid curiosity driving me toward the very thing I feared most. The hallway behind seemed to stretch and contract, the shadows pooling at the corners like ink in water, her whispered words oscillating through the oppressive air. Don't look back. But that voice, it wasn't just the timbre nor the words, but the harrowing knowledge that it spoke without any visible lips to carry the melody. I dared not allow my gaze to fully interpret the scene, my eyes instead tracing the faded floral pattern of the wallpaper that bubbled and peeled like the skin of some tortured beast beneath my trembling fingers. The air shifted. A low, mournful whine slipped through the unseen crevices of the old house, as if it breathed with the agony of centuries. Walking seemed fut. Each step mired in doubt and dragging heavier than the last. The darkness appeared to twitch, animate in its watchfulness. From the corner of my eye, and despite the dreadful warning, I glimpsed what might have been movement, a shade darker than the rest, sliding along the wall with serpentine grace. Soon, the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the thump of my heart trying to burst from my chest. I reached for the doorknob at the end of the corridor, the metal icy against the sweat of my palm. The sensation startled a gasp from me, too loud in the pressing silence. Before I could turn the handle, the chill air prickled the back of my neck, a whisper against my ear so faint I might have imagined it. Don't look back. I turned the knob, the door creaking open as if in pain. The whine escalated into a groan, and as the gap widened, a sliver of night invaded the space, revealing nothing but deep, impenetrable darkness. It beckoned, a void promising oblivion. A part of me, the very essence of my being, yearned to step inside, to succumb to the void's embrace, to end the unbearable tension. I hesitated on the threshold, breathing jagged, when a cold breath washed over me, smelling faintly of decay and old earth. It invigorated my senses, snapped me from the entrancement. Instinctively, I reached for the switch to my left, flicking it up, expecting the comforting flood of electric light. But the bulbs overhead flickered feebly, then died, as though choked by the thick, palpable dread that the darkness emitted. Behind me, a floorboard creaked ominously. Panic surged, every instinct screaming to flee, to hide, but where? The house was an enigma wrapped in shadows, each room more menacing than the last. I strained my ears to place the sound, my eyes desperately searching the fringes of the dark for a sign, any sign of movement. It was then I realized the breath on my neck wasn't my own, and the creaking wasn't from the structure of the house settling. It was rhythmic, paced, drenched in intent, a slow, deliberate step followed by another. Someone, something, was moving toward me, its presence obscured but its menace palpably closing in. I couldn't move forward, couldn't retreat. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, urging me to look back, to see the face of my terror. Yet the child's voice echoed, a loop of ceaseless warning in my pounding skull, meshing with my own voice which I barely recognized as I muttered fragments of prayers and curses. A louder creak snapped the paralysis that gripped me. With a jolt of adrenaline, I stumbled into the dark room before me, pulling the door shut with a trembling force that sounded deafening in the eerie stillness. I pressed my sweat-slicked forehead against the cool wood, resisting the physical urge to look through the keyhole. A thud against the door, then another. Slow, deliberate. Whatever was on the other side wanted in, or perhaps, more terrifying still, it wanted me to know it was there. My heartbeat was so loud, I feared it would alert the entire world to my whereabouts. Shadows seemed to crowd around me, suffocating, yet oddly protective against the horrors that lay beyond. But protection was merely an illusion here. I realized that as across my closed lids flashed the image of the child, her eyes hollow, her voice a distorted memory, uttering the words that were both a shroud and a shackle. Don't look back. The pounding continued, an eerie lullaby that sang of nights that never end, of darkness that engulfs. I clenched my teeth, fighting to remain upright, to not succumb entirely. Yet, in that infinite moment, wedged between terror and darkness, the true horror was not that I might see what lay behind me, but the creeping realization that I might never see anything else again.